The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen adjusted his pack one final time. The weight felt familiar against his shoulders, 48 pounds of gear that had become an extension of himself over 3 tours of duty. Around him, his SEAL team moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this dance too many times before. "Radio check," whispered Lieutenant Jake Morrison, their team leader. His voice barely carried over the mountain wind, but each man heard him clearly through their headsets. "Bravo 1, good copy," Chen responded, his breath visible in the thin mountain air. "Bravo 2, solid," came the voice of Petty Officer First Class David Tank Rodriguez, whose broad shoulders earned him his nickname years ago in Coronado. "Bravo 3, loud and clear," answered Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tyler Brooks, the youngest member of their team at 24, but already seasoned by 2 previous deployments. "Bravo 4, roger that," concluded Chief Petty Officer Sam Williams, the team's most experienced operator at 36, whose calm demeanor had pulled them through more tight spots than anyone cared to count. Morrison nodded, satisfied with the comms check. Intelligence had been tracking a high-value target in this remote valley for weeks. Abdul Rashid Nazir, a Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, was believed to be hiding in a compound 3 clicks northeast of their current position. The mission was straightforward: infiltrate, capture, or eliminate the target, and extract before dawn. The team had inserted via helicopter 12 hours ago, landing on a rocky outcrop 8 kilometers south of their objective. They had moved through the night, navigating by starlight and GPS, their night vision goggles turning the treacherous mountain terrain into a green-tinted maze of rocks and shadows. Chen glanced at his watch. 0547 hours. They were making good time, but the sun was climbing higher with each passing minute. Soon, the advantage of darkness would be gone, and they would be exposed on the mountainside like ants on a sidewalk. "Tank, how's our 6?" Morrison asked quietly. Rodriguez, who served as their rear security, turned his weathered face toward the path they had traveled. At 32, he had been with the teams for 8 years, long enough to develop an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it materialized. "Clear as glass, LT," he replied. "No movement, no sounds except the wind and some goats about a click back." Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. As the team's corpsman, he carried additional medical supplies that added weight to his already heavy load. More importantly, he carried the responsibility of keeping his teammates alive if things went sideways. The young man from rural Montana had joined the Navy to see the world and ended up in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but he had never regretted his decision. "Doc, how's your breathing up here?" Williams asked, noticing the younger man's labored breathing. The altitude was nearly 9,000 feet, thin enough to challenge even the most conditioned athletes. "I'm good, Chief," Brooks replied, though his face showed the strain. "Just pacing myself." Williams nodded approvingly. At 6'3" and built like a linebacker, the chief had been in the teams longer than some of his teammates had been alive. He had started as an enlisted sailor, worked his way up through the ranks, and earned his trident through sheer determination and skill. His presence was like an anchor for the younger members of the team. Morrison studied the terrain ahead through his binoculars. The valley opened up before them, a patchwork of terraced fields and mud brick compounds connected by narrow dirt roads. Intelligence photos had identified their target's hideout, a fortified compound on the eastern slope, surrounded by high walls and overlooking the main road through the valley. "Visual on the objective," Morrison reported. "Compound matches the satellite imagery. 2 guards visible on the roof, possible 3rd in the courtyard." Chen moved up to Morrison's position and pulled out his own binoculars. Through the magnified lenses, he could see the compound clearly. The walls were higher than he had expected, at least 12 feet, topped with coils of razor wire. The main gate faced west, away from their approach route, but there appeared to be a smaller entrance on the north side. "What do you think, Sergeant?" Morrison asked. As team leader, the lieutenant made the final decisions, but he valued the input of his experienced NCO. "Walls are higher than intel suggested," Chen observed. "But the north entrance looks promising. If we can breach there, we'll have a clear line of approach from the tree line." Morrison nodded. The plan they had rehearsed called for a pre-dawn assault, hitting the compound from multiple directions simultaneously. Chen and Brooks would take the north entrance, while Morrison and Rodriguez approached from the east. Williams would provide overwatch from a rocky outcrop 200 meters south of the compound. "Chief, can you get eyes on that overwatch position?" Morrison asked. Williams studied the terrain through his scope. The position looked good, elevated, with clear lines of sight to the compound, and multiple escape routes if they needed to displace quickly. Looks solid, LT, Williams reported. Good field of fire, cover and concealment, multiple egress routes. I can provide suppressive fire if needed and call in air support if things get hairy. The team began their final approach as the sun climbed higher. They moved in a staggered formation, using the natural contours of the mountainside for concealment. Each man was acutely aware that they were now in enemy territory, where a single mistake could mean death or capture. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility as the team's automatic weapons specialist. The M249 saw slung across his back could provide devastating firepower, but it also made him a priority target for enemy fighters. He had learned to embrace that responsibility over his 8 years with the teams, knowing that his firepower often meant the difference between his teammates going home or coming home in flag-draped coffins. Brooks checked his medical kit one more time as they moved. Morphine, bandages, hemostatic agents, airway management tools, everything needed to keep a wounded operator alive long enough to reach definitive medical care. He had used these supplies too many times, watching blood seep through his fingers as he fought to save lives on battlefields across Afghanistan and Iraq. Morrison felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in his chest. As team leader, every decision was his responsibility. The success or failure of the mission, the lives of his men, all rested on his shoulders. At 28, he was young for a SEAL officer, but he had earned the respect of his team through competence and courage under fire. 15 minutes to assault position, Morrison whispered into his radio. Chen acknowledged and quickened his pace slightly. He thought about his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Emma, both waiting for him in San Diego. Sarah never asked about the details of his missions, she knew better than to expect answers, but he could see the worry in her eyes every time he deployed. The photo of Emma in his helmet was creased from handling, showing a gap-toothed smile that reminded him why he did this job. Williams reached his overwatch position first, settling into a natural depression between two large boulders. From here, he had an unobstructed view of the compound and the surrounding terrain. He deployed his bipod and chambered around, then began a methodical scan of the area through his scope. Overwatch in position, he reported quietly. Copy, Chief, Morrison replied. Beginning final approach to assault positions. The compound looked peaceful in the morning light. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sounds of normal daily life drifted across the valley, children playing, animals moving, the distant sound of a diesel generator. It was easy to forget that somewhere inside those walls was a man responsible for the deaths of American soldiers and innocent civilians. Chen and Brooks reached their position behind a low stone wall 50 meters from the compound's north entrance. The gate was smaller than the main entrance but still substantial, heavy wood reinforced with metal bands. Chen studied it through his binoculars, looking for weak points and possible booby traps. Morrison and Rodriguez took position in a grove of pine trees on the eastern approach. From here, they could see the main entrance and most of the compound's courtyard. Rodriguez deployed his saw on a fallen log, creating a stable firing position with good fields of fire. All elements in position, Morrison reported to his team and to the Joint Operations Center monitoring their mission from hundreds of miles away. Roger, Bravo team, came the reply from their controller. You are cleared hot. Execute at your discretion. Morrison checked his watch. 0623 hours. The timing was critical, they needed to complete the assault and begin their extraction before the valley woke up completely. Too early, and they might miss their target. Too late, and they would face the entire population of the valley. Stand by, Morrison whispered. Each man made his final preparations. Chen checked his breaching charges one more time. Brooks ensured his medical kit was easily accessible. Rodriguez chambered around in his saw. Williams settled his crosshairs on the compound's main entrance. Execute, 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 Morrison commanded. Chen and Brooks moved simultaneously toward the north gate. The breaching charge detonated with a sharp crack, blowing the gate inward in a shower of splinters and dust. They rushed through the breach, weapons raised, scanning for targets. The courtyard was empty except for a few chickens that squawked and scattered at their approach. Chen moved toward the main building while Brooks covered the surrounding walls and rooftops. Morrison and Rodriguez breached the main entrance seconds later, their approach masked by the sound of Chen's explosive. They found themselves in a narrow corridor lined with closed doors. Building clear so far, Morrison reported. Williams watched the assault unfold through his scope, ready to engage any threats that appeared. His years of experience had taught him patience. Sometimes the best thing an overwatch position could do was remain invisible and ready. The team moved methodically through the compound, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. They found evidence of recent occupation, warm ashes in fireplaces, fresh food, clothing and equipment, but no people. Compound clear, Morrison reported after 10 minutes of searching. Target is not present. Evidence suggests recent evacuation. Chen found a radio in the main building, still warm from recent use. Papers scattered on a low table included maps of the local area with coalition patrol routes marked in red ink. Their target had been here recently but had somehow learned of their approach. We've been compromised, Morrison concluded. Initiate immediate extraction. Williams felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. From his elevated position, he could see movement on the roads leading into the valley. Dust clouds marked the approach of multiple vehicles from 3 different directions. "LT, we've got company," Williams reported urgently. Multiple vehicles converging on our position from north, south, and west. I count at least 6 vehicles, possible more. Morrison felt his stomach drop. They were 3 kilometers from their extraction point, with no cover except what they could create for themselves. The nearest coalition forces were hours away, and their helicopter support wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes. "How long do we have, Chief?" Morrison asked. Williams studied the approaching dust clouds through his scope. 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they're being cautious. Rodriguez quickly gathered intelligence materials from the compound while the others prepared for movement. Maps, photographs, and communication equipment went into his pack, intelligence that might prove valuable even if they couldn't capture the primary target. Brooks felt his heart rate increase as adrenaline flooded his system. This was the part of the job that never got easier, the transition from hunter to hunted, from aggressor to survivor. "Rally Point Alpha," Morrison ordered, referring to a predetermined location halfway to their extraction point. "Move with speed and stealth." The team departed the compound in a staggered formation, Williams providing overwatch as the others began their movement across the valley floor. The morning sun was now fully up, eliminating any chance of using darkness for concealment. Chen took point, using his knowledge of the terrain to guide them along the most concealed route possible. They moved through irrigation ditches and between terraced fields, using every bit of available cover. First vehicles entering the valley, Williams reported. Technical with mounted machine gun, plus what looks like 2 trucks full of fighters. Morrison estimated 30 to 40 enemy combatants, armed with AKs, RPGs, and at least 1 heavy machine gun. Against 5 SEALs with limited ammunition and no immediate support, the odds were not encouraging. They reached Rally Point Alpha, a cluster of large boulders beside a seasonal stream, as the first enemy vehicles arrived at the compound they had just vacated. Williams had displaced from his overwatch position and rejoined the team, carrying his long rifle and pack. "Options?" Morrison asked his team. Chen studied their map. 2 possible routes to the extraction point. "We can follow the stream bed, good concealment but slow movement, or take the ridgeline, faster but completely exposed." Rodriguez checked his ammunition. "I've got 400 rounds for the saw, plus whatever's in my rifle. Not much for a sustained firefight." Brooks inventoried his medical supplies mentally, hoping he wouldn't need them but knowing the odds were against them. Williams pointed to a series of peaks east of their position. "High ground might give us an advantage. Force them to come at us uphill, limit their mobility." Morrison weighed their options. Stay and fight with limited ammunition, or run and hope they could reach extraction before being caught in the open. Neither choice was attractive. "We move to the high ground," Morrison decided. "If we're going to make a stand, I want the advantage of elevation." The team began climbing toward a rocky outcrop 200 meters above the valley floor. The ascent was steep and exposed, but it offered commanding views of the surrounding terrain. Behind them, enemy fighters had discovered their trail and were beginning to follow. Shouts in Pashto echoed across the valley as the hunt began in earnest. Chen's lungs burned as they climbed, the thin air making every step an effort. He thought of Emma's laugh and Sarah's smile, drawing strength from the memory of what waited for him at home. Rodriguez felt the weight of his weapon and ammunition with every step. The saw was a beast to carry, but its firepower might be the only thing that kept them alive in the next hour. Brooks focused on placing each foot carefully on the rocky slope. A twisted ankle or broken bone would doom not just him but, potentially, the entire team. Williams scanned their back trail through his scope as they climbed. The enemy was organizing, bringing up heavier weapons and beginning a systematic search of the valley. Morrison pushed the team harder as enemy fire began to impact around their position. AK-47 rounds sparked off rocks near their heads, and the distinctive whistle of an RPG passed overhead. They reached the rocky outcrop as the enemy began their assault up the mountainside. The position offered good cover and fields of fire, but it was also a trap. Once committed to the fight, there would be no easy way off the mountain. "Set up defensive positions," Morrison ordered. "Chief, can you reach the TOC?" Williams tried his radio, but the mountainous terrain blocked their signal to the distant operations center. They were on their own until their scheduled extraction window. The enemy fighters moved with the confidence of men fighting on their home ground. They knew these mountains, understood how to use the terrain, and had the advantage of numbers and local support. Rodriguez positioned his saw to cover the most likely approach routes up the mountain. Chen and Brooks spread out to provide flanking fire, while Morrison coordinated their defense from the center of their position. Williams found a position with a clear view down the mountainside and began engaging targets at maximum range. His first shot dropped an enemy fighter at 400 meters, causing the others to dive for cover and slow their advance. "First blood to the chief," Rodriguez reported with grim satisfaction. The firefight intensified as more enemy fighters joined the assault. Bullets cracked and whined through the air, striking rocks and sending stone chips flying like shrapnel. The sound was deafening in the confined space of their defensive position. Chen felt a round pass so close to his head that he felt the wind of its passage. He returned fire with controlled bursts, each shot carefully aimed to conserve ammunition. Brooks used his rifle to engage targets while simultaneously preparing medical supplies. In this business, it was always a matter of when, not if, someone would be wounded. Morrison coordinated their fire and tried to maintain radio contact with anyone who might be listening. Their situation was deteriorating rapidly, and, without support, they would eventually be overrun. The enemy fighters were learning, using cover and concealment to get closer to the American position. Some had worked their way around to the flanks, forcing the SEALs to defend on multiple fronts simultaneously. "We're getting flanked on the north side," Chen reported, shifting his position to engage new threats. Rodriguez traversed his saw to support Chen, the machine gun's rapid fire forcing the flanking element to seek cover. But his ammunition was running low, and he couldn't maintain this rate of fire much longer. Williams continued to engage targets at long range, but he was down to his last magazine for his rifle. After that, he would have only his sidearm and the knowledge that they were truly in desperate straits. The sun climbed higher, bringing with it the realization that their extraction window was still hours away. They had enough ammunition for perhaps 15 more minutes of sustained combat, after which they would be reduced to fighting with rocks and harsh language. "Contact front!" Morrison shouted as a group of enemy fighters attempted to rush their position. The 5 SEALs poured concentrated fire into the attacking force, dropping several fighters and forcing the others to retreat. But each successful defense cost them precious ammunition and brought them closer to the moment when their weapons would fall silent. Chen felt sweat stinging his eyes as he changed magazines. His last magazine. After this, he would be reduced to his sidearm and whatever ammunition his teammates could spare. Brooks saw blood on Rodriguez's sleeve where a bullet had grazed him, but the big man continued to fire his saw as if nothing had happened. The wound was minor, but it reminded them all of how thin the line was between life and death. Morrison tried his radio again, hoping for a miracle. Any station, this is Bravo Team. We are in contact, Grid 41 or QQ12345-67890, requesting immediate assistance." Static was his only answer. The enemy fire intensified as more fighters reached the mountain and joined the assault. The SEALs were surrounded now, cut off from any hope of escape, with limited ammunition and no support. Williams took careful aim at an enemy fighter carrying an RPG launcher. The shot was long, nearly 500 meters and uphill, but the alternative was having that rocket-propelled grenade impact in their midst. He squeezed the trigger gently, feeling the familiar recoil of his rifle. Downrange, the enemy fighter dropped, the RPG launcher clattering down the mountainside. "Nice shot, Chief," Chen called out. But Williams knew it was just delaying the inevitable. There were too many of them, and the Americans were running out of options. The firefight had been going on for 20 minutes now, and enemy fighters were getting closer with each assault. Some were within 50 meters of their position, close enough that the SEALs could see their faces and hear their voices clearly. Rodriguez's saw ran dry with a metallic click that seemed to echo across the battlefield. He dropped the empty weapon and drew his sidearm, knowing that the loss of his machine gun significantly reduced their defensive capability. "Saws down," he reported matter-of-factly. Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him like the mountain itself. These men trusted him to lead them, and he was leading them into what looked increasingly like their final battle. Brooks checked his watch. Still 6 hours until their extraction window opened. They had perhaps 5 more minutes of effective ammunition, after which they would be fighting with bayonets and determination alone. The enemy seemed to sense their desperation and pressed their attack with renewed vigor. Shouts and war cries echoed up the mountainside as dozens of fighters prepared for what they believed would be the final assault. Chen fired his last rifle round and smoothly transitioned to his sidearm. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. After that, he would have to rely on his knife and his training in close-quarters combat. Williams was down to 3 rounds for his rifle when he heard something that made his heart skip a beat. The distant crack of a high-powered rifle, coming from somewhere high above their position. An enemy fighter who had been advancing on their left flank suddenly dropped, blood blooming across his chest. A second later, another fighter fell, then another. "What the hell?" Morrison muttered, scanning the peaks above their position through his binoculars. Williams felt a surge of hope as he realized what was happening. Someone else was on the mountain, someone with a long-range rifle and the skill to use it effectively. The enemy fighters were confused by the new threat, unsure where the fire was coming from. Their organized assault began to falter as fighters sought cover from the mysterious sniper. Rodriguez managed a weak smile despite his exhaustion. "Looks like we might have some help after all." Brooks continued to scan for targets while trying to spot their unknown benefactor. Whoever was up there had just shifted the odds significantly in their favor. Chen felt a renewed surge of energy as another enemy fighter dropped to the mystery sniper's fire. Maybe Emma would see her daddy again after all. Morrison tried to process this new development while continuing to coordinate his team's defense. They were still outnumbered and low on ammunition, but the psychological effect of the sniper fire on their enemies was dramatic. The enemy fighters were now caught between 2 fires, the SEALs below and the sniper above. Their confident advance had turned into a desperate search for cover as bullets rained down from the peaks. Williams used his binoculars to scan the high ground, trying to identify their mysterious ally. The shots were coming from extreme range, probably over 1,000 meters, requiring exceptional skill and equipment. "Whoever's up there knows their business," Williams observed with professional appreciation. The battle was far from over, but, for the first time in the last hour, the 5 SEALs dared to hope that they might live to see another sunset. High above the battlefield, Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez adjusted her scope with the precision of a surgeon. From her concealed position among the jagged rocks at 11,000 feet, she had been watching the drama unfold through her high-powered optics for the past 30 minutes. The Barrett M82 rifle beside her represented the culmination of 15 years of military service and countless hours of training at the Army Sniper School. Elena had not planned to be on this mountain. Her mission was entirely separate, a solo reconnaissance operation to gather intelligence on enemy supply routes through the high passes. She was supposed to remain invisible, a ghost in the mountains, observing and reporting but not engaging. Those orders had become meaningless the moment she watched 5 American operators fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Through her scope, she could see the exhaustion etched on the faces of the men below. Their ammunition was nearly expended, their position was compromised, and enemy fighters were closing in from multiple directions. Without intervention, they would be dead or captured within minutes. Elena's own story was one of determination overcoming prejudice. Born to Mexican immigrants in East Los Angeles, she had joined the Army at 18 to escape a future of poverty and limited opportunities. The military had given her purpose, direction, and, eventually, the chance to become one of the deadliest snipers in the United States Armed Forces. Her path to the mountains of Afghanistan had been anything but conventional. After completing basic training, she had volunteered for every difficult assignment available, slowly proving herself in a male-dominated military culture that often questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. Multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan had honed her skills and hardened her resolve. The Barrett rifle weighed 30 pounds and fired .50 caliber rounds capable of stopping vehicles or penetrating light armor. In Elena's hands, it became an instrument of precision death, capable of eliminating threats at distances exceeding 2 miles. The scope mounted on top cost more than most people's cars and could distinguish between facial expressions at ranges measured in kilometers. Elena had been tracking a high-value target through these mountains for 6 days. Intelligence suggested that a senior Taliban commander was using the remote passes to smuggle weapons and fighters from Pakistan. Her orders were to observe, photograph, and report, but not to engage unless directly threatened. Those orders were written by people who had never watched fellow Americans die when they had the power to prevent it. Elena's spotter, Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, lay beside her with a high-powered spotting scope and range-finding equipment. At 26, Thompson was 7 years younger than Elena but had already proven himself as one of the best spotters in the Army. His job was to calculate wind speed, atmospheric conditions, and target range, then feed that information to Elena for her shots. Winds picking up from the southwest, Thompson reported quietly, his voice barely audible over the mountain breeze. Gusting to 15 knots. Range to the closest target is 940 meters. Elena made minute adjustments to her scope, accounting for the bullet's trajectory over nearly a kilometer of mountain air. At this distance and altitude, dozens of variables could affect her shot: temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, the rotation of the Earth itself. She had been tracking the battle below through her scope, watching as the enemy fighters organized their assault. Through the powerful optics, she could see details that the embattled SEALs below could not: the positions of enemy leaders, the placement of heavy weapons, the routes being used for flanking movements. Target acquired, Elena whispered, settling her crosshairs on an enemy fighter carrying an RPG launcher. The man was positioned behind a large boulder, believing himself safe from the Americans below. He had no idea that death was watching him from a mile away. Elena controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate and finding the natural pause between heartbeats. Her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, increasing gradually until the rifle fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the peaks. The .50 caliber round covered the distance to its target in less than 2 seconds, striking the enemy fighter center mass and dropping him instantly. The RPG launcher clattered down the mountainside, eliminated as a threat to the Americans below. Hit, Thompson confirmed through his spotting scope. Target down. Elena was already acquiring her next target, a machine gunner who had set up a PKM on a rocky outcrop. This shot was more challenging, requiring her to compensate for the target's elevated position and the increased wind speed at his location. The second shot was as precise as the first, eliminating the machine gun team before they could bring effective fire to bear on the trapped SEALs. Elena felt no emotion as she watched the enemy fighters fall. This was simply her job, executed with the professionalism that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. Thompson adjusted his spotting scope to track additional targets. Multiple personnel moving up the south slope. Range 1,080 meters. Wind consistent from the southwest. Elena shifted her aim to the advancing fighters. These men were using good tactics, moving in short rushes between available cover, but they were still exposed to observation and fire from her elevated position. Her third shot eliminated the leader of the flanking element, causing the others to dive for cover and disrupting their coordinated advance. The psychological effect was as important as the physical casualties. The enemy fighters were now aware that they were being hunted by an unknown sniper, making them cautious and indecisive. Beautiful shot, Thompson murmured with professional appreciation. His job was to spot targets and calculate firing solutions, but he had developed a deep respect for Elena's abilities over their 18 months working together. Elena had earned Thompson's respect through competence and consistency. She never missed when it mattered, never lost her composure under pressure, and never left a teammate behind. In the brotherhood of arms, those qualities mattered more than gender, race, or background. Below on the battlefield, the enemy fighters were struggling to adapt to the new threat. Their assault had been based on overwhelming the American position through coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The presence of a sniper in the high ground had disrupted their timing and shaken their confidence. Elena could see confusion spreading through the enemy ranks as their leaders tried to reorganize the attack while dealing with an unknown threat. Some fighters were looking up toward the peaks, trying to spot the sniper's position, while others continued to focus on the trapped Americans. Target concentration near the large boulder cluster, Thompson reported. Range 1,100 meters. Multiple personnel, appears to be a leadership element. Elena studied the indicated area through her scope. She could see several fighters grouped around what appeared to be a radio operator, probably coordinating the overall assault. Eliminating this element would further disrupt enemy operations. She adjusted for the increased range and changing wind conditions, then settled into her firing position. This shot required maximum precision. At over a kilometer, the margin for error was minimal. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as the round departed, beginning its journey across the mountain valley. Elena tracked the impact through her scope, watching as her target dropped and the other fighters scattered in panic. Hit, Thompson confirmed. Leadership element disrupted. Remaining personnel seeking cover. Elena had been a sniper long enough to understand the psychological impact of her fire. The enemy fighters below were now fighting two battles, one against the Americans in their immediate vicinity, and another against an invisible threat that could strike without warning from impossible distances. Fear was a powerful weapon, often more effective than bullets. Fighters who were worried about snipers moved differently, fought differently, made mistakes they would never make under normal circumstances. Thompson spotted movement on the northern approach to the American position. Multiple targets moving through the tree line. Range 800 meters. They're trying to get close. This group was using better tactics, moving through covered terrain and avoiding open areas where they might be exposed to sniper fire. Elena would need to be patient, waiting for them to expose themselves before taking her shots. The first fighter emerged from the trees at a dead run, sprinting toward a rocky outcrop that would provide cover for his teammates' advance. Elena led the target slightly, accounting for his movement and the bullet's flight time. Her shot caught him mid-stride, spinning him around and dropping him in the open ground between the trees and his intended cover. The shock of watching their point man fall caused the other fighters to halt their advance and reconsider their tactics. Elena immediately shifted to cover the tree line, knowing that the other fighters would eventually have to emerge if they wanted to continue their assault. Patience was a sniper's greatest virtue, the willingness to wait hours for the perfect shot, the discipline to hold fire until victory was assured. Thompson monitored radio frequencies, trying to intercept enemy communications. His Arabic was limited, but he could understand enough to gain insights into their tactical situation. "They're talking about pulling back," Thompson reported. "Sounds like they're taking more casualties than expected." Elena continued to scan for targets while Thompson gathered intelligence. The enemy fighters were learning to respect the threat from above, but they were also adapting their tactics to minimize exposure. A new group of fighters appeared on the eastern slope, moving in single file along a narrow goat path. Elena tracked their movement through her scope, waiting for the right moment to engage. The lead fighter paused at a bend in the path, probably checking for threats before continuing. That momentary pause was all Elena needed. Her shot eliminated him instantly, and his body tumbled down the mountainside, blocking the path for those behind him. Path blocked, Thompson observed with satisfaction. That's going to slow down their eastern approach. Elena was already looking for her next target when she noticed something concerning through her scope. Several enemy fighters were setting up what appeared to be a mortar in a concealed position behind a stone wall. "Mortar team, 11 o'clock, she reported to Thompson. Range 1,200 meters. Mortars posed a significant threat to both the trapped Americans and to Elena's own position. The indirect fire weapons could drop explosives behind cover, eliminating the defensive advantage that the Americans had been using to survive. Thompson calculated the firing solution for the extreme range shot. Winds picked up to 20 knots, variable direction. Temperatures rising with the sun. This is going to be a difficult shot. Elena made the necessary adjustments to her scope, accounting for the challenging conditions. At this range, environmental factors became critical. A small miscalculation could cause her bullet to miss by several meters. She studied the mortar team through her scope, watching their movements and timing. They were working efficiently, setting up the weapon with the practiced ease of experienced fighters. She would have only one chance before they could begin dropping rounds on the Americans below. Elena controlled her breathing and found her natural point of aim. The crosshairs settled on the mortar operator just as he bent over the weapon to make a final adjustment. The rifle fired, sending its deadly message across more than a kilometer of mountain air. Elena tracked the impact through her scope, watching as the operator collapsed over his weapon and the other team members dove for cover. Target eliminated, Thompson confirmed. Mortar threat neutralized. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction as she watched the enemy fighters abandon the now useless weapon. Each successful shot not only eliminated an immediate threat but also degraded the enemy's overall capability and morale. The sun was climbing higher now, changing the lighting conditions and creating heat mirages that could affect her shots. Elena adjusted her scope to compensate for the changing atmospheric conditions. Thompson spotted new movement on the western slope. Vehicle approaching. Looks like a technical with mounted machine gun. Range 1500 meters. This was the longest shot Elena had attempted today, pushing the limits of her rifle and optics. The vehicle was moving, which added another layer of complexity to an already challenging engagement. Elena tracked the vehicle through her scope, studying its movement pattern and speed. The driver was following a winding mountain road, occasionally disappearing behind terrain features before emerging in open areas. She would need to time her shot perfectly, predicting where the vehicle would be when her bullet arrived nearly 3 seconds after firing. Miss, and the machine gun could devastate the American position below. The vehicle emerged from behind a large boulder, following the road at a steady 20 miles per hour. Elena led the target, placing her crosshairs ahead of the vehicle and accounting for its movement. The shot was perfect, striking the driver and causing the vehicle to veer off the road and crash into a rocky outcrop. The mounted machine gun was eliminated as a threat, and several enemy fighters were injured in the crash. Outstanding shot, Thompson said with genuine admiration. Driver down, vehicle disabled. Elena continued scanning for targets while Thompson monitored enemy communications. The psychological effect of her long-range fire was becoming apparent. Enemy radio traffic indicated confusion and growing reluctance to continue the assault. Fear was spreading through the enemy ranks like a virus. Fighters who had been aggressive and confident were now hesitant and defensive, unsure where the next shot might come from. Elena had been trained to exploit this psychological advantage. Each shot was carefully chosen not just for its immediate tactical effect but for its impact on enemy morale and decision-making. A group of fighters attempted to move through a narrow ravine, believing the steep walls would provide protection from sniper fire. Elena waited patiently until they reached a point where the ravine opened up, exposing them to fire from her position. Her shot eliminated the lead fighter and caused a rockslide that blocked the ravine behind the others, trapping them in the narrow gorge. They were now cut off from their main force and unable to contribute to the assault. Nicely done, Thompson observed. They're trapped like rats in that ravine. Elena shifted her attention to other areas of the battlefield. The enemy assault was losing momentum as casualties mounted and command and control deteriorated. Through her scope, she could see the American position below. The 5 SEALs were still fighting, but she could tell their ammunition was nearly exhausted. They were spacing their shots carefully now, making each round count. Elena's intervention had bought them time, but the situation was still precarious. The enemy had numerical superiority and local knowledge of the terrain. Without resupply or reinforcement, the Americans would eventually be overrun. Thompson monitored the tactical frequency used by American forces, hoping to establish contact with other coalition units in the area. The mountainous terrain made radio communications difficult, but he continued trying to raise someone who could provide assistance. Still no joy on the radio, Thompson reported. Too much terrain masking. Elena nodded, focusing on the immediate tactical situation. She couldn't control the larger strategic picture, but she could continue eliminating threats and buying time for the Americans below. A new group of enemy fighters appeared on the northern ridge, moving carefully but steadily toward the American position. Elena counted at least 8 fighters, all armed with assault rifles and RPGs. She began engaging them systematically, starting with the leaders and working her way through the formation. Each shot was precise, eliminating threats and disrupting the enemy's coordination. Multiple targets, northern ridge, Thompson confirmed. She's picking them off one by one. Elena's reputation as a sniper had been built through thousands of hours of training and dozens of successful missions. She had learned to read terrain, understand enemy tactics, and exploit weaknesses in their defensive postures. The enemy fighters on the northern ridge were using good individual tactics but poor unit coordination. They were spread out enough to minimize casualties from a single engagement but not communicating effectively to coordinate their movements. Elena exploited this weakness, engaging isolated fighters who had moved ahead of their teammates. Without effective communication, the remaining fighters were unable to coordinate a response to the sniper threat. Thompson continued to spot targets and calculate firing solutions while monitoring the overall tactical situation. The enemy assault was definitely losing momentum, but they still had significant numbers and could potentially reorganize for another attack. "Looks like they're pulling back to regroup," Thompson observed, watching enemy movements through his spotting scope. Elena maintained overwatch on the battlefield while the enemy fighters withdrew to covered positions. The immediate threat to the Americans had been reduced, but the tactical situation remained fluid. She could see the 5 SEALs moving within their defensive position, redistributing ammunition and adjusting their positions. They were using the lull in fighting to improve their defensive posture and treat any wounded. Through her powerful scope, Elena could see the exhaustion on their faces, the way they moved with the careful economy of men who had been fighting for their lives. She felt a kinship with these warriors, even though she had never met them and probably never would. Thompson spotted movement in a distant valley. Vehicles approaching from the east. Multiple trucks, probably reinforcements for the enemy. This development changed the tactical equation significantly. If enemy reinforcements arrived, the Americans would face impossible odds, even with Elena's support from the high ground. Elena studied the approaching vehicles through her scope, counting at least 4 trucks loaded with fighters. At current speed, they would reach the battlefield in 30 to 40 minutes. She made a tactical decision that went far beyond her original orders. Instead of remaining in an overwatch position, she would have to relocate to intercept the reinforcements before they could join the assault. "We're moving," Elena announced to Thompson. "Those reinforcements can't be allowed to reach the battle." Thompson quickly gathered their equipment while Elena broke down her rifle for movement. They would have to move fast to reach a position where they could interdict the approaching vehicles. Elena's decision to abandon her concealed position and actively hunt the enemy reinforcements represented a significant escalation of her involvement. She was no longer a passive observer but an active participant in the battle. The 2 soldiers moved quickly across the rocky terrain, using their knowledge of mountain warfare to navigate efficiently through the treacherous landscape. Elena carried her rifle and essential equipment while Thompson handled their communication gear and extra ammunition. They reached a new position overlooking the mountain road just as the first truck came into view. Elena quickly set up her rifle while Thompson calculated range and wind conditions for the new location. First truck entering the kill zone, Thompson reported. Range 800 meters and closing. Elena settled into her firing position, placing her crosshairs on the lead vehicle. At this range, she could effectively engage the trucks and their passengers, potentially stopping the reinforcements before they reached the battle. Her first shot shattered the windshield of the lead truck, killing the driver and causing the vehicle to crash into the mountainside. The other trucks stopped immediately, their passengers jumping out and seeking cover among the rocks. Lead vehicle down, Thompson confirmed. Remaining trucks have stopped and dismounted their passengers. Elena was already engaging the dismounted fighters, using her elevated position and superior optics to pick them off one by one. The enemy fighters were caught in the open with minimal cover, making them easy targets for a skilled sniper. Thompson counted the casualties while monitoring for additional threats. "That's got to be at least 20 fighters down. The remainder are pulling back toward the valley." Elena continued to engage targets until the surviving enemy fighters withdrew beyond effective range. The reinforcements had been stopped, but at the cost of revealing her position to the enemy. "Time to move again," Elena announced, already beginning to pack her equipment. Thompson nodded, understanding that their muzzle flashes and the sound of Elena's rifle had compromised their position. Enemy fighters would soon be climbing toward their location, seeking to eliminate the sniper who had been decimating their ranks. The 2 soldiers moved quickly to a new position, one that offered good fields of fire back toward the main battlefield. Elena could continue to support the trapped Americans while Thompson maintained communications and security. From their new position, Elena could see the 5 SEALs still holding their rocky outcrop. The enemy assault had been disrupted by her intervention, but the tactical situation remained precarious. She settled into overwatch mode again, scanning for new threats while Thompson tried once more to establish radio contact with coalition forces in the area. "Still no joy on comms," Thompson reported. "But I'm picking up some helicopter traffic on the aviation frequency. Might be their extraction." Elena felt a surge of hope. If extraction birds were en route, the Americans might survive this engagement after all. Her job would be to keep them alive until the helicopters arrived. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters regrouping in the valley below, probably planning another assault. They had learned to respect the sniper threat, but they still had numerical superiority and local knowledge. Elena made a personal promise as she watched the 5 Americans fighting for their lives below. These men would go home to their families if she had anything to say about it. The mysterious sniper in the mountains had adopted them, and she would fight to protect them with every round she possessed. Lieutenant Morrison wiped blood from a shallow cut on his cheek where rock fragments had struck him during the last enemy assault. The mysterious sniper in the mountains had bought them precious time, but their situation remained desperate. They were down to their final magazines, medical supplies were running low, and enemy fighters continued to probe their defenses from multiple directions. Ammunition count, Morrison called quietly to his team. 2 mags for the rifle, half a mag for the sidearm, Chen reported, his voice steady despite their circumstances. Same here, LT, Brooks confirmed, checking his medical kit between rifle magazines. And I've got 4 morphine syrettes left if we need them. Rodriguez hefted his disabled saw with disgust. Sidearm only. Maybe 20 rounds total. The loss of his machine gun had reduced their defensive firepower significantly. Williams, their sniper, inventoried his remaining ammunition with professional precision. 1 mag for the rifle, full load for the pistol. After that, we're down to harsh language and pointed sticks. Morrison calculated quickly in his head. Roughly 200 rounds remaining among 5 operators, facing an estimated 40 to 50 enemy fighters. The mathematics were not encouraging, even with their mysterious guardian angel providing support from above. The rocky outcrop they had chosen for their defensive position offered good cover and commanding fields of fire, but it was also a trap. The steep slopes that protected them from assault also prevented easy withdrawal. They were committed to this ground whether they liked it or not. Chen studied the terrain below through his binoculars, looking for signs of enemy movement. The Taliban fighters had learned to respect the threat from above, moving more cautiously and using available cover more effectively. But they were still coming. Movement in the tree line, 2 o'clock, Chen reported quietly. Looks like they're setting up for another push. Morrison acknowledged with a hand signal, maintaining radio silence to avoid giving away their exact positions. The enemy had demonstrated good tactical discipline, and there was no point in providing them with additional intelligence. Brooks felt the weight of responsibility that came with being the team's corpsman. In addition to fighting as a rifleman, he was responsible for treating casualties and keeping his teammates alive. The medical supplies in his pack represented their only hope of surviving serious wounds. Rodriguez had taken the loss of his saw personally. The machine gun was his signature weapon, the tool that had kept his teammates alive through 3 previous deployments. Without it, he felt diminished, reduced to just another rifleman in a fight that called for overwhelming firepower. Williams used his sniper rifle scope to scan the distant ridges, looking for any sign of their mysterious benefactor. Whoever was up there had exceptional skill and equipment, but Williams couldn't locate the firing position despite years of experience hunting enemy snipers. Can't spot our friend up there, Williams reported. Whoever they are, they know their business. Morrison felt the burden of command weighing heavily on his shoulders. These men trusted him to lead them, to make the decisions that would determine whether they lived or died. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing. The enemy probe began as a series of individual movements, single fighters advancing from cover to cover while their teammates provided suppressive fire. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the Taliban demonstrated surprisingly good tactical discipline. They're learning, Morrison observed quietly. This isn't like the last assault. Chen tracked one of the advancing fighters through his rifle scope, waiting for a clear shot. The enemy soldier was using terrain and cover effectively, making himself a difficult target. When he finally exposed himself, Chen's shot dropped him cleanly. 1 down, Chen reported, already scanning for the next target. The enemy response was immediate and violent. AK-47 fire raked their position, forcing all 5 Americans to seek cover behind the largest rocks. Bullets sparked and whined overhead, the sound deafening in the confined space. Brooks felt his heart rate spike as adrenaline flooded his system. This was the part of combat that never got easier, the moments when death seemed to hang in the air like smoke, when survival depended on inches and split seconds. Rodriguez emerged from cover long enough to engage a target with his sidearm, then immediately rolled back to safety as return fire chewed up the rocks where he had been lying. Fighting with a pistol against assault rifles was not ideal, but it was better than not fighting at all. Williams found a narrow gap between two boulders that allowed him to observe the battlefield while remaining concealed. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters maneuvering closer to their position, using the dead ground between ridges to mask their movement. "They're getting closer," Williams warned. "Maybe 300 meters and closing." Morrison made rapid calculations in his head. At their current rate of ammunition expenditure, they had perhaps 10 more minutes of effective defensive fire. After that, they would be reduced to fighting with bayonets and whatever improvised weapons they could create. The sound of the mystery sniper's rifle echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the sight of an enemy fighter spinning away from his position behind a large boulder. Even at this distance, the Americans could see the devastating effect of the .50 caliber round. "Scratch one more," Rodriguez observed with grim satisfaction. Elena's intervention had disrupted the enemy assault, but Morrison knew they couldn't depend on the sniper indefinitely. Ammunition was finite, even for their guardian angel, and the enemy was learning to counter the threat from above. Chen spotted movement on their left flank and adjusted his position to cover the new threat axis. The enemy was trying to coordinate their assault, hitting the American position from multiple directions simultaneously. "Left flank, 2 tangos moving up the ravine," Chen reported. Williams shifted his aim to support Chen, but his rifle scope was designed for long-range precision shooting, not the close-range targets now threatening their position. He fired anyway, more for the psychological effect than any hope of precision. Brooks prepared himself mentally for the inevitable casualties. In his experience, it wasn't a matter of if someone would be wounded, but when and how badly. His job was to keep them alive long enough to reach definitive medical care. The enemy assault intensified as more fighters joined the attack. Morrison could see at least 15 fighters advancing on their position from 3 different directions, all moving with the confidence of men who sensed victory was within their grasp. "Here they come," Morrison announced, his voice calm despite the circumstances. The 5 Americans poured concentrated fire into the attacking force, each shot carefully aimed to maximize effect. Chen's marksmanship training paid dividends as he dropped 2 fighters in quick succession. Williams used his precision rifle to eliminate a third. Rodriguez found himself engaged in a pistol duel with an enemy fighter who had worked to within 50 meters of their position. The Taliban soldier was using a captured American M4 rifle, making him a dangerous opponent at this range. The duel lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Rodriguez used cover and movement to avoid the enemy's fire while looking for an opportunity to engage effectively with his sidearm. When the Taliban fighter paused to reload, Rodriguez put 3 rounds center mass and watched him fall. Brooks engaged targets while simultaneously monitoring his teammates for signs of injury. The chaos of close-range combat made it difficult to track everyone's condition, but so far they had been remarkably lucky. Morrison coordinated their defensive fire while trying to maintain situational awareness of the overall battle. The enemy was pressing hard, but they were also taking heavy casualties. The question was whether the Americans would run out of ammunition before the enemy ran out of fighters. Williams's rifle ran dry with a metallic click that seemed to echo across the battlefield. He smoothly transitioned to his sidearm, knowing that the loss of his precision rifle significantly reduced their long-range capability. "Rifles down," Williams reported matter-of-factly. Chen felt his own rifle lock open on an empty magazine, his last magazine. He performed a tactical reload with his sidearm, 15 rounds standing between him and hand-to-hand combat. The enemy fighters sensed the reduction in American firepower and pressed their assault with renewed vigor. Shouts and war cries echoed across the mountainside as they closed the distance to the defensive position. Rodriguez was down to his last magazine when he saw an enemy fighter appear at the edge of their perimeter, close enough to throw a grenade into their position. Without hesitation, Rodriguez launched himself forward, tackling the fighter before he could arm the explosive device. The 2 men rolled down the rocky slope, fighting desperately for control of the grenade and the Taliban fighter's rifle. Rodriguez's size and strength gave him an advantage, but his opponent fought with the desperation of a man defending his homeland. Brooks saw Rodriguez's predicament and moved to assist, leaving his covered position and exposing himself to enemy fire. His first shot missed, but his second caught the Taliban fighter in the shoulder, allowing Rodriguez to gain control of the situation. "Rodriguez is down in the rocks," Brooks reported, applying suppressive fire to cover his teammate's position. Morrison felt their defensive perimeter contracting as casualties and ammunition shortages forced them into an increasingly smaller area. They were running out of space, time, and options. Williams used his sidearm to engage targets at ranges that would have been impossible with a rifle. His experience and training allowed him to make shots that seemed miraculous under the circumstances, but he knew he was operating on borrowed time. Chen found himself face to face with an enemy fighter who had somehow worked his way to within 10 meters of their position. The Taliban soldier was young, perhaps 18, with the determined expression of a true believer. Chen's first shot missed, his second didn't. The close-quarters nature of the fighting was taking a psychological toll on all 5 Americans. These weren't distant targets seen through rifle scopes, but human beings close enough to see their faces, hear their voices, watch them fall. Brooks felt something wet running down his arm and realized he had been wounded by rock fragments from a near miss. The injury was minor, but it reminded him of how thin the line was between life and death in this fight. Morrison's rifle ran dry as he engaged a fighter trying to flank their position. He transitioned to his sidearm, knowing that they were now in the final phase of their ammunition supply. "We're down to pistols," Morrison reported to his team. "Make every shot count." Rodriguez climbed back up the slope to rejoin his teammates, bleeding from multiple cuts and scrapes but otherwise functional. He had acquired the dead Taliban fighter's AK-47 and several magazines of ammunition. "Got us a resupply," Rodriguez announced, checking the captured weapons function. The AK-47 was a welcome addition to their firepower, but it was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. They were still outnumbered, still cut off, still fighting for their lives with limited resources. Williams spotted movement on the high ground above their position and felt his heart sink. Enemy fighters were working their way around to the ridgeline above them, which would give them a commanding position over the American defensive perimeter. "We've got company upstairs," Williams warned. "They're trying to get above us." Morrison realized that their position was about to become untenable. If the enemy gained the high ground, they could fire down into the American position with impunity. The rocky outcrop that had protected them was about to become their tomb. Chen used his sidearm to engage the fighters moving above them, but the angle was difficult and his pistol lacked the range for effective fire. The enemy soldiers were smart enough to stay back from the edge, using the terrain to mask their movements. Brooks applied a pressure bandage to his wounded arm while continuing to scan for targets. The medical training that made him valuable as a corpsman also made him acutely aware of how quickly their situation was deteriorating. Rodriguez's captured AK-47 jammed at the worst possible moment, forcing him to clear the malfunction while under fire. The rifle was old and dirty, probably not properly maintained, making it unreliable in the critical moment when they needed it most. Morrison made a command decision that went against every instinct he possessed. Instead of defending their current position until they were overwhelmed, they would have to move, and moving meant abandoning the cover that had kept them alive. "We're displacing to the secondary position," Morrison announced. "Move on my command." The secondary position was a smaller cluster of rocks 50 meters away, offering less protection but preventing the enemy from gaining the high ground advantage. It was a calculated risk that could either save their lives or hasten their deaths. Williams provided covering fire with his sidearm while his teammates prepared to move. The pistol was inadequate for suppressing enemy positions, but it was all he had left. Chen gathered the last of their ammunition while Brooks prepared his medical kit for movement. Every piece of equipment they left behind was gone forever, but weight was now their enemy almost as much as the Taliban fighters. Rodriguez got his captured rifle functioning again just as Morrison gave the command to move. The 5 Americans bounded between positions under fire, using movement and suppressive fire to minimize their exposure. Brooks felt bullets cracking past his head as he ran between the 2 positions. One round passed so close he felt the wind of its passage, a reminder that survival was measured in inches and milliseconds. They reached the secondary position with all 5 men still functional, though Rodriguez was bleeding from a new wound on his leg and Williams had taken a bullet graze across his ribs. "Head count," Morrison called as they settled into their new defensive perimeter. "Chen, operational. Brooks, good to go. Rodriguez, still in the fight." The big man's leg was bleeding, but he was still mobile and capable of fighting. "Williams, ready." The graze across his ribs burned like fire, but it hadn't penetrated deeply enough to cause serious damage. Morrison felt a moment of pride in his team's performance under impossible circumstances. They had been fighting for over an hour against overwhelming odds, and all 5 men were still in the fight. Their new position offered limited protection and poor fields of fire, but it denied the enemy the commanding heights they had been seeking. It was a temporary solution that bought them precious minutes of life. Elena's rifle spoke again from the distant peaks, eliminating an enemy fighter who had been maneuvering to outflank the Americans' new position. The mysterious sniper was still out there, still fighting to keep them alive. Chen used his binoculars to scan for their benefactor, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person who had saved their lives multiple times. The shooter was invisible, a ghost in the mountains who struck without warning and disappeared without trace. Brooks treated Rodriguez's leg wound while maintaining security, applying a pressure bandage to stop the bleeding. The wound was painful but not life-threatening, allowing Rodriguez to continue fighting. Williams used his position to observe enemy movements, calling out targets and directing his teammates' fire. His experience as a sniper gave him insights into enemy tactics and intentions. Morrison calculated their remaining resources with the cold precision of a professional soldier. Ammunition, perhaps 50 rounds total. Medical supplies, enough to treat minor wounds. Water, nearly gone. Time until extraction, still hours away. The enemy seemed to sense their desperation and pressed the assault with renewed vigor. Fighters who had been cautious were now bold, closing the distance and accepting casualties to finish off the trapped Americans. Rodriguez's captured AK-47 provided welcome firepower, but the ammunition was running low. He carefully spaced his shots, making each round count while conserving what little they had left. Chen felt exhaustion settling into his bones like a weight. They had been fighting for over an hour in the thin mountain air, burning energy and adrenaline at an unsustainable rate. Brooks monitored his teammates for signs of exhaustion, dehydration, and shock. The human body could only sustain this level of stress for so long before systems began to fail. Morrison tried his radio again, hoping for a miracle. Any station, this is Bravo Team. We are in contact and require immediate assistance." Static was his only answer, the mountainous terrain blocking their signals to the outside world. Williams spotted enemy fighters setting up another mortar position in a concealed location behind a stone wall. The indirect fire weapon posed a significant threat to their exposed position. "Mortar team, 10 o'clock, Williams reported. We need to take them out before they get that thing operational." Chen and Rodriguez concentrated their fire on the mortar position, using their remaining rifle ammunition to suppress the weapon team. Their shooting was accurate, but they lacked the firepower to eliminate the threat completely. Elena's rifle cracked again from the high peaks, and the mortar team scattered as their weapon was destroyed by a precisely placed .50 caliber round. The mysterious sniper continued to watch over them like a guardian angel. Morrison felt a surge of gratitude toward their unknown protector. Without the sniper's intervention, they would have been dead or captured an hour ago. Someone up there was fighting just as hard to keep them alive as they were fighting to stay that way. The battle had become a test of endurance as much as firepower. Both sides were taking casualties, both sides were running low on ammunition, both sides were fighting exhaustion and the effects of prolonged combat stress. Chen's sidearm clicked empty, leaving him with only his knife and his training in hand-to-hand combat. He reloaded his last magazine, knowing that after these 15 rounds, he would be fighting with edged weapons. Brooks continued to treat minor wounds while engaging targets with his rifle. The dual role of medic and rifleman was challenging under the best circumstances, almost impossible under their current conditions. Rodriguez felt his leg wound throbbing with each heartbeat, but the pain helped keep him alert and focused. He had been wounded before and knew how to compartmentalize the discomfort while continuing to fight. Williams used the last rounds in his sidearm to engage enemy fighters who had worked to within 30 meters of their position. At this range, marksmanship mattered less than rapid, accurate fire. Morrison made another command decision as their ammunition situation became critical. They would have to conserve what little they had left for the final assault, when enemy fighters would be close enough to engage with bayonets and improvised weapons. "Hold fire unless they're inside 50 meters, Morrison ordered. "Save what we have for the final push." The 5 Americans settled into defensive positions among the rocks, watching as enemy fighters moved closer through the available cover. Each man understood that they were probably fighting their last battle. Chen thought of his daughter Emma, remembering her laugh and the way she called him daddy in her tiny voice. If he didn't make it home, at least she would know that her father had died fighting for something important. Brooks felt the weight of his medical responsibilities even as his combat role took precedence. These men were depending on him to keep them alive, but his supplies were nearly exhausted and his options were running out. Rodriguez gripped his captured AK-47 and prepared for hand-to-hand combat. He had trained for this moment throughout his military career, but training and reality were very different things. Williams found peace in the knowledge that he had served with honor alongside good men. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they had fought well and given everything they had. Morrison looked at each of his teammates and felt a surge of pride that overwhelmed his fear. These men had followed him into hell and stayed with him when retreat was impossible. They deserved better than to die on this mountainside. The enemy fighters were now close enough to throw grenades, and the final phase of the battle was about to begin. Elena felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like the mountain itself. Through her scope, she could see the 5 Americans in their desperate final stand, surrounded and nearly out of ammunition. She had been fighting alongside them for over an hour, eliminating threats from impossible distances, but she was running low on ammunition herself. Thompson continued to spot targets and calculate firing solutions, but even his professional optimism was being tested by their situation. They had started with 40 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, and Elena was down to her last magazine. 5 rounds remaining, Elena reported quietly, checking her rifle's magazine. After that, we're down to our sidearms. Thompson monitored enemy radio traffic through his intercept equipment, trying to gain intelligence on their intentions. The chatter was increasing, suggesting that the enemy was preparing for a final assault. They're massing for one big push, Thompson reported. Sounds like they're bringing everyone they have left. Elena studied the battlefield through her scope, counting enemy fighters and identifying priority targets. She could see at least 20 fighters moving into assault positions, while others provided supporting fire from covered locations. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 5 rounds remaining, 20 plus targets, and no margin for error. Each shot would have to eliminate a critical threat or disrupt a key element of the enemy assault. Elena had been in the army for 15 years, but she had never faced a tactical situation this desperate. Her training had prepared her for many scenarios, but watching fellow Americans fight their last battle while being unable to save them was not one of them. Through her scope, she could see the exhaustion on the faces of the men below. They had been fighting for over 90 minutes in thin mountain air, burning energy and adrenaline at an unsustainable rate. Thompson spotted movement on the eastern ridge. Multiple targets moving into assault positions. Range 900 meters. They're setting up for coordinated attack. Elena shifted her aim to the eastern ridge, identifying the most dangerous threats. An enemy fighter carrying an RPG launcher caught her attention. That weapon could devastate the American position with a single well-placed shot. Her first shot eliminated the RPG threat, the .50 caliber round striking the launcher and detonating the rocket inside. The explosion killed the operator and wounded several nearby fighters, disrupting their entire assault element. RPG threat neutralized, Thompson confirmed. Secondary explosions, multiple casualties. Elena immediately shifted to her next target, a machine gunner who had set up a PKM on the ridgeline. This weapon could provide devastating suppressive fire during the enemy assault, pinning the Americans in their positions while other fighters closed for the kill. Her second shot destroyed the machine gun position, eliminating another critical threat to the Americans below. But she could see enemy fighters adapting to her fire, using more cover and concealment to minimize their exposure. Thompson spotted a new threat developing on the southern approach. Command element, 10 o'clock, range 1,000 meters. Looks like they're coordinating the final assault. Elena studied the indicated area through her scope, seeing several fighters grouped around what appeared to be a radio operator. Eliminating this element would disrupt their command and control at the critical moment. Her third shot eliminated the radio operator and caused the command element to scatter, but enemy fighters were already beginning their assault. Time was running out for everyone involved. 2 rounds left, Elena announced, feeling the weight of those words. Thompson continued to monitor the tactical situation while Elena searched for the most critical targets. The enemy assault was developing on multiple fronts simultaneously, making it difficult to prioritize threats. Elena could see enemy fighters moving through the rocks below the American position, using dead space to get close enough for grenades and close-quarters combat. Once they reached those positions, her long-range fire would be ineffective. Her fourth shot eliminated a fighter who had worked to within 30 meters of the American perimeter, but others were already moving to take his place. The tide of battle was turning against them despite her intervention. Thompson heard something on the radio intercept that made his heart skip a beat. "Elena, I'm picking up American helicopter traffic on the aviation frequency. Sounds like they're en route to our area." Elena felt a surge of hope as she acquired her final target. One round left, and she had to make it count. Through her scope, she could see an enemy fighter preparing to throw a grenade into the American position. Her last shot was perfect, eliminating the grenade threat just as the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters began to echo across the valley. Help was finally arriving, but it might be too late. Thompson grabbed his radio and attempted to contact the approaching aircraft. Any helicopter, this is Overwatch 7-7. American ground forces in contact, Grid 41 are QQ12345-67890, requesting immediate assistance." The response came immediately, crackling with static but clearly audible. "Overwatch 7-7, this is Pegasus Flight, 2AH-64 Apaches inbound your location. Can you mark friendly positions?" Thompson felt tears of relief forming in his eyes as he realized that the 5 Americans might actually survive this engagement. "Pegasus Flight, friendly positions marked by IR strobes. Danger close, repeat, danger close." Elena grabbed her binoculars to observe the American position, where she could see the faint flicker of infrared strobes that were invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible to aircraft equipped with night vision systems. The sound of the approaching helicopters was now clearly audible to everyone on the battlefield. Enemy fighters looked up nervously as the distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades grew louder. Elena could see the 2 Apache attack helicopters approaching from the north, flying low and fast through the mountain valleys. These aircraft were among the most lethal weapons systems in the American arsenal, specifically designed to destroy enemy ground forces. "Pegasus Flight, this is Overwatch 7-7, Thompson radioed. Multiple enemy fighters surrounding friendly position. Estimate 20 to 30 armed personnel, AK-47s and RPGs if friendlies are marked with IR strobes." The lead Apache pilot acknowledged the transmission with professional calm. "Copy, Overwatch 7-7. We have visual on IR strobes. Beginning attack run on enemy positions." Elena watched through her binoculars as the lead helicopter began its gun run, the 30mm chain gun beneath its nose rotating toward the enemy positions. The sound was like thunder rolling across the mountains, followed by the distinctive crack of high-explosive shells impacting among the enemy fighters. The effect was immediate and devastating. Enemy fighters who had been moving confidently toward the American position suddenly found themselves under attack by one of the most lethal weapons systems ever created. Thompson coordinated with the helicopter pilots while Elena observed the results of their fire. "Pegasus 1, adjust fire 50 meters east. Multiple personnel in the tree line." The second Apache joined the attack, its rockets streaking toward enemy positions with deadly precision. The combination of cannon fire and rocket attacks was decimating the enemy force and breaking up their coordinated assault. Elena could see the 5 Americans in their defensive position, probably wondering if they were hallucinating the sound of salvation approaching through the mountain air. After 90 minutes of desperate fighting, help had finally arrived. The enemy fighters were now caught between the Americans below and the attack helicopters above, with no good options for escape or continued resistance. Some attempted to flee, while others sought cover among the rocks. "Pegasus Flight, this is Bravo Team," came a new voice on the radio, Lieutenant Morrison, finally, able to establish contact with friendly forces. "Bravo Team, Pegasus 1, the helicopter pilot responded. We show you marked with IR strobes. What's your status?" Morrison's voice was steady despite their circumstances. 5 personnel, minor casualties, low on ammunition. We've had Guardian Angel support from unknown sniper position. Elena smiled at being referred to as a Guardian Angel. It was better than some of the names she had been called during her military career. Thompson keyed his radio. "Pegasus Flight, Overwatch 7-7. Guardian Angel is 2 personnel at Grid 41 are QQ12367-67912. We've been providing Overwatch and long-range interdiction." The Apache pilot acknowledged the transmission. "Copy, Overwatch 7-7. Outstanding work. You saved American lives today." Elena felt a surge of pride at the pilot's words. This was why she had joined the army, why she had endured years of training and multiple combat deployments to protect American lives when it mattered most. The helicopter attack was breaking the